evening and welcome to the Warriors Journal episode 2. And today I have with me Dr. Sundar, a very well-known doctor and a phenomenal human being, well-known to our community. Thank you very much, Doctor, for joining us this evening. And without further delay, I'm going to request you to please take over as I share the screen of your presentation.
Thank you, Kidney Warrior Foundation. Thank you, Marian. Let's go ahead with the presentation. Now,
I'll go from the beginning, Doc.
Okay, go from the beginning. I think this is...
Yeah.
Okay. Now, next slide, please. I would like to thank the Kidney Warrior Foundation and Vasundhara ji for inviting me here to share my thoughts, my journey as a transplant nephrologist within the last 3 to 4 decades. And next slide. Now, disclosures, next slide. I'm attached to many companies, advisor, so I'm just disclosing. Now, this, next slide, please. This slide tells you, once you have kidney failure, we doctors use a term called uremia. Uremia is a Greek word, literally meaning blood in the urine. Blood in the urine is uremia. And you see a picture on the screen of MGR, MG Ramachandran, the former chief minister, actor, well-known actor, who had kidney failure and later on kidney transplant. And then we have Jayaprakash Narayan, who was a leader during emergency time. Why I put these two pictures is, before their coming into picture, into limelight, nobody knew what was kidney failure. In fact, nobody knew what was nephrology. Nephrology was a new specialty and people didn't know about kidney failure. When Jayaprakash Narayan had kidney failure, then it was on the front pages of most newspapers and people knew about dialysis and some amount of knowledge came in. But in 1984, MG Ramachandran, the Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, he was admitted with breathing difficulty in the hospital. People thought he has got some asthma, and then it turned out that he had diabetic kidney disease, and later on he had dialysis and transplantation. So before 1984, I was in CMC Vellore in 1983. At that point of time, anybody, I would say, you got kidney failure, I have to explain in detail what are kidneys, and men would always understand. They thought the kidney was the scrotum or testis, whereas women would not understand. When I told them kidney failure, they'll always imagine it was the men who had kidney failure, not women. And it was difficult for me even to explain what kidney failure was. After MGR had kidney failure, it became very easy. All I had to do was tell them, you got MGR disease, or in Tamil, MGR vyadi. And immediately the patients would come and ask me, sir, what type of dialysis? It is PD or hemodialysis? Do you think I can go for transplantation? So it's very important that people who are celebrities, if they have this problem, the explanation becomes easier and also the awareness becomes easier. Next slide. Now, some amount I will tell you on interventional nephrology, how when you talk of nephrology, it is actually doing dialysis. And this is Dr. Ken Abrio, an Indian guy settled in US, my good friend and well-known interventional nephrologist. Whenever you say intervention nephrology, it actually meaning how to create an access for dialysis, how to take care. It's a separate specialty which has come up. Next slide. This is again, to do dialysis, what we used to use in those days was something called Scribner shunt. Before the advent of Scribner shunt, doing dialysis was not easy. Every dialysis, the artery had to be poked separately, the vein had to be poked separately. So every dialysis was an ordeal. Long-term dialysis was more or less not possible. With the advent of Scribner shunt, if you see the picture here, there is a silicon tube. One tube is in the artery, other is the vein, and it's connected outside, and the blood is continuously circulating outside. The red color which you see is blood circulating outside. The problem with this was, there's a foreign body coming out, so the chance of infection, bleeding were very high. In fact, I remember a story in Ramai Medical College in those days when I started dialysis. One of my patients actually attempted suicide by using a nail clipper and cutting off the shunt material, and he had a massive bleeding and we had a tough time saving his life. So now shunts are not there. We have something called AV fistula and we have got excellent catheters. They will come in to take care of dialysis patients. Next slide. Now this is again dialysis we started in Karnataka in 1971 in Manipal. This black and white photograph. You can see how dialysis was being done. Next slide. This is just historical perspective of telling you what is dialysis. This again, next slide. Okay, just telling you some the dialysis, how it looked. Now let me look at the incidence of the problem, magnitude of the problem in India. Now we actually don't have the exact figures, but roughly we can tell you from what is called as guesstimate or guess estimate. Now we have something called CKD registry. We have some amount of information. Roughly 250 new cases per million population will occur every year. That means a population in India, 250,000 to 300,000 new cases occur every year, which will require dialysis or transplantation. I'm talking of end-stage renal disease, which requires dialysis or transplantation. The magnitude is phenomenal. And look at the number of people taking care. The Indian Society of Nephrologists, the rough estimate is about more than 1,000. I think now we have about 1,500 people in the Indian Society of Nephrology as members. But the number of nephrologists of Indian origin in the American Society of Nephrology is more than what is there in India. So that means we are short of people. We need more people, more training centers, and we are trying to do that. It's not easy. It's a big burden. Next slide. Again, this gives you the kidney disease burden. What is CKD and what are the incidents which occurs? Next slide. Now, this again tell you that one of the causes of CKD is what is called as diabetic CKD. Now, 30, 40 years ago, when I started my dialysis transplant program, only 1 or 2% of the patients with ESRD had diabetes. In fact, that is not a common disease. And now, if you look at it, if you look at my own figures in the last 30, 40 years, nearly 50% of my patients on dialysis or transplant are due to diabetes. In fact, my good friend Shashank Joshi, a renowned diabetologist in Bombay, tells me his own impression was every 5th Indian will be a diabetic and every 5th diabetic will be an Indian. So it's a scary figure which you're looking at. Next slide. And if you look at the diabetes people in the world, 30 years or 20 years down the line, nearly 30% of all diabetics will eventually end up in ESRD. That is why I say ESRD or end-stage renal disease is an epidemic. Diabetic ESRD is a pandemic. Now, with the advent of pandemic of COVID, a combination of diabetic ESRD pandemic and a COVID pandemic does not spell good. It is quite dangerous. Next slide. Now, my own figures over last 2,500 transplant, look at diabetic ESRD, it's about 42%. And then the remaining cause, which requires dialysis or transplant, I have said as GOK, that is God only knows, because these patients come to me with small kidneys. We don't know what is the exact cause. So I call it GOK. Mostly they would be what is called as chronic glomerulonephritis or interstitial nephritis, where the kidneys have become small. They are, most of the time, the kidney disease is a silent killer. They come late, and that's what happens. Then there are familial disease like polycystic kidney disease, then Alport syndrome, and various other causes which cause ESRD. Next slide. Now, the question now people keep asking, when you have ESRD, which is better? Is dialysis better or transplant better? Now, this is a difficult question to answer, but nevertheless, you must understand transplant and dialysis are not competitive. They are complementary to each other. It's a procedure where when you are on dialysis, it's a bridge transplantation. The ideal would be every patient on dialysis should go for kidney transplant. That is ideal, but everything is not ideal in this world. Next slide. Now, if you look at again this explanation, how when you have 100 patients on dialysis now, at the end of 10 years, only about 20 will be still going on well on dialysis. Whereas with a transplant, if you do 100 transplant today, at the end of 10 years, 80% will be doing well with a transplant. So basically, a transplant offers good quality life, and also the morbidity and mortality with a transplant is much less compared to dialysis. Next slide. Again, this gives you a survival figures. If you look at the long-term survival, 5 years of dialysis and transplant, definitely the red line on the top tells you how in 5 years, nearly 90% are doing well on a transplant, whereas only about 40% are doing well at 5 years of dialysis. So definitely a transplant is the option for people with end-stage renal disease. Next slide. Now, the most important risk factor for ESRD is not getting a renal transplantation. And very interestingly, the studies in the United States, a lot of registers tell you just being on the waiting list, chance of doing well or chance of going ahead without any problem are good. Just being on the waiting list of transplantation can make your life different. Next slide. This again tells you the survival of diabetic ESRD patient with a living donor, cadaver, and dialysis. So any sort of transplantation, living donor would be the ideal form of treatment for ESRD. Next comes cadaver, and the lowest is, if you look at the figure, the green line is the being on dialysis. Next slide. Now, this again tells you a number of years. Now, you look at a person who's 40 years, a normal person will have another 40 years of life left. But a person who's 40 on dialysis, less than 10 years lifespan. But a person who is 40 has transplant, he gets 20, 30 years life. So again, tells you how getting a transplant would be the best option when you have end-stage renal disease. Next slide. Now, quality of life. I think this is very important. Previous slide, please. The quality of life. Previous slide, Marian. Quality of life. You look at the quality of life towards dialysis and transplantation. Starting from physical functioning, body pain, mental health, emotion, social functioning, general health, and also the what we call fertility. Definitely transplant favors over dialysis. Next slide. That's why my friend, next slide, Dr. Mistry told me that the magical cure of kidney failure is kidney transplantation. That's what even Shakespeare said, a man of my kidney. I don't know whether he meant transplantation, but nevertheless, we use this quote quite often in our field. Next slide. Now, once you have CKD, it is inevitable. It's only a question of time. You get into end-stage renal disease. That is the 5th stage of CKD, where only option is renal replacement therapy. When you say renal replacement therapy, it is dialysis or transplantation. And in between, there is death. And this is what happens to most patients. So many patients, they are not even aware of kidney disease and they pass away without even knowing that they have a kidney problem. And in a way, it may be ignorance, may be bliss. But when you have CKD, it's only a question of time before you reach end-stage renal disease. Between CKD and ESRD, the starting CKD to ESRD, we can do certain things. We can control your blood pressure, we can control the diet, and we can postpone the inevitable, but we cannot avoid it. It is like aging. I'm 65 now. Next year, I'm 66. However young I try to act, definitely the age will keep going. Same way with CKD, progression to ESRD is inevitable, and we have to be ready with all the options. Next slide. Now, again, this again tells you how kidney transplantation gives the best chance for returning to a near normal life. Next slide. Now, let me go into a little bit of history. This is Hindu mythology where all transplant physicians all over India, we salute Lord Ganesha. In fact, we had Ganesh Chaturthi recently. Ganesha is the world's first xenotransplant, where a head of an elephant was put on a human body. And we consider Lord Shiva as the world's first transplant surgeon. And if you look at Ganesha, he's got all the signs of steroid, high dose of steroids. He's got stunted growth and he's got pot belly. That's what we say, maybe because of his steroids. And also mythology, we have Dadichi, who donated his spinal cord to make a powerful weapon for Indra. So a lot of stories are there where organ donation has been encouraged and it should be the norm. Next slide. Then we have the ancient Sushruta where skin grafts are being done. And historically, now the plastic surgeons, you still use some of Sushruta technique for skin grafting. And Chinese literature tells us that probably thousands of years ago, even heart transplant was done by Chinese doctors. This may be a mythology, it may be just a fiction, but nevertheless, there is some story behind this story. Next slide. Then comes the European history. When you look at the Christian stories of Cosmos and Damien, these were two Christian brothers, they are angels actually, who conduct a leg transplant. You can see a picture of a black leg on a white man's body where a leg transplant was done. So this again goes back to show how probably transplant was attempted even in those in the in the European era. Then we have bottom two eminent surgeons. One is Dr. Sir Roy Kahn from UK, other is Dr. Starzl, both renowned transplant surgeons who did a lot of work on immunosuppression also. And then the other figure you see here, a chimera, a lion's head, a snake's body, a snake tail, and this is the logo for the Indian Society of Organ Transplant, meaning so many other animals have been mixed together and then you get a chimera. There are many chimeras in history, European history and Indian history. It just tells you how probably this is true, not true, but this, it gives you some inspiration. Next slide. Again, now, when you go back to the history of transplantation, one of the most important development was by Sir Alexis Carrel. He actually devised how to anastomose vessels. And this technique of vascular anastomosis, even though is being used 100 years down the line, the basic technique of Alexis Carrel is still the base for doing either kidney transplant or liver transplant or even doing a fistula. That is the technique of doing anastomosis. Anastomosis is connecting two blood vessels, two arteries or artery and vein. So that technique is still going on. Next slide. Then some more history we have where the discovery of drugs. If you look at the transplant going on, one of the problem of transplant in those days was what is called as rejection. The body would reject, and the drugs available were very less. The earliest drug to be used was azathioprine and Imuran, and a lot of work has been done for that at that point of time. Next slide. This again tells you the discovery of blood group. I think that made a lot of difference. When the transplants were being done, people didn't know about blood group, and the body would reject the organ because of different blood group. And Karl Landsteiner, the man who described blood group, and the concept of compatible blood group transplantation came in at that point of time. So in the history of transplant, discovery of blood group is very important for us to know. Next slide. Now this is the world's first transplant done in Boston in 1954 between twin brothers, no immunosuppression, and the recipient lived for 8 years after transplantation. This is actually one side is the actual photograph of the transplant going on. The other side is a painting which is still there in Boston in the Brigham Medical Center. Next slide. Now this is the surgeon, Dr. Joe Murray. He got Nobel Prize. I was very fortunate to see him in 1992 in Singapore, where you can actually see Dr. Murray with the donor, the kidney donor, and these are the Herrick twins who had transplantation, and that made history. So this sort of what we are now seeing after 75 years is still the technique used by Dr. Murray and his team in Boston. Next slide. Now this again tells you how twin brothers, how they had a transplant, and this was a landmark in the history of transplantation. Next slide. Now when you go back to history in India, the Indian transplantation actually started off with Dr. Sen trying to do transplant, was not successful. Later on, Dr. Udupa, actually Udupa is from Udupi, that's why his name Udupa, he also attempted, but it was not successful transplant. But the first successful transplant, next slide, was done in CMC Vellore in 1971. And the transplant was done by Dr. Paul Mohan Rao, the senior surgeon, and Dr. Johnny was the nephrologist. Together they did the transplant. And after that, a lot of centers have started doing transplant. I'm very fortunate that I happen to be a product of CMC Vellore. I joined in 1982, and I'm whatever I am, I owe it to my alma mater. Next slide. Now, this again, the great masters, we honored them in 2007 during our transplant meeting. You can see Dr. Johnny and Dr. Paul Mohan Rao being honored by the overseas minister, Vailar Ravi. We honored them. And the other two pictures, one is Dr. Chako Jacob on the right side of the screen. He's practicing in Bangalore, the senior nephrologist now in Bangalore. And left side is Dr. Meshak Kribakaran. He's also my guru, and he's settled in Australia. And he also said he'll be attending my Zoom. I think now with all this confusion we had, I hope he's seeing it on Facebook. Nevertheless, I salute them for giving me this knowledge to help my patients. Next slide. This again, some few of nostalgic figures. You can see me as a young trainee in CMC Vellore, and some of my colleague nephrologists were there in Australia. Some of them, Dr. Pradeep Deshpande is in Hyderabad, Dr. Raju in Andhra Pradesh. So these are some of my friends who all grew up with me from 80s to be nephrologists. And Dr. Balaji is also in Australia now. This again, some more nostalgic figures. You can actually see me standing with one of my transplant patients in 1982. And then I went last year to Vellore, and this is one more picture of my son, Raghav, and my wife standing in front of the nephrology department. Now you can actually see Raghav winning a lot of awards for his work on cancer. So the long journey has been there in my life too. So I owe it to CMC Vellore for that. And I thank God for all that's been done in my life. Next slide, please. Now, this again is a very nostalgic photograph. Next slide, which shows you the actual photograph of the transplant team, which did the transplant in 1971. In the front row, you can actually see in the center, Dr. K.V. Johnny, Dr. Shastri, late Dr. Shastri, my guru, Dr. Mohan Rao, Dr. Meshak, Dr. Chako Jacob, dialysis technician, nurses, all of them taking a photo after the first transplant, which was done in 1971. It's a very nostalgic, memorable photo. Next slide. Then the kidney warriors, what you got, these are the first sort of kidney warriors in India. The first set of transplant recipients, 20 or 30 of them standing, taking photograph. It's a very nostalgic, important photograph. And look, one of the important things you see, most of them were on high dose of steroids. That's why they've got what is called as Cushingoid phase, moon phase. Their dose of steroid, even when I was trained, I used to use high dose of steroids in transplantation. The first week, they would get 100 milligram of prednisolone every day for a few days. The dose used was very high. Nowadays, we come down very fast. So we have learned a lot of new things. Next slide. And this again, how the police commissioner is honoring us. Next slide. Next slide. This is Dr. Johnny and Dr. Mohan Rao being honored by the overseas minister for helping India. India's first transplant were done by these two giants in the field of transplantation. Next slide. Now, let me go into some milestones in Karnataka. The first live donor kidney transplant was done in Lakeside Hospital, where I used to work in 1983. Then I started my transplant career in Ramaya Medical College in 1987. Then down the line, Manipal Hospital did the first cadaver transplant in 1998. Then we started doing ABO incompatible transplant. Next slide. And my own experience, if you see, of the 3,500 whatever transplant we said, actual transplant done under my care directly involved is 2,700. Remaining 800 are transplant done in various other units over the last 35 years, coming for follow-up or taking care from me. Next slide. Now, I would like to pay at this time homage to my friend Dr. Talwalkar, who actually started nephrology in 1979 in Bangalore. And you can actually see Dr. M.K. Mani, the famous nephrologist, inaugurating the unit in Bangalore in 1979. Next slide. And this again tells you some the earlier figures, how the dialysis used to look in 1954 and how it looked in 1990. That's actually in 1990, me with a lot of hair taking care of a patient. 2010, the machines have changed, patients have changed, technology has changed. In those days, dialysis was not easy because doing dialysis requires good water supply, good power supply, and both we didn't have. It was not easy. Next slide. Now, at this point of time, I always, whenever I talk on transplant or ESRD, I actually salute my good friend, Mr. Kamal Shah. I don't know whether he's seeing the program now. Kamal Shah is something unique. I think all of you should visit his website. In fact, I have learned a lot. A lot of patients tell me that, doctor, you have taught me a lot. It's not true. I have learned a lot from my patients. And one patient which has taught me is Kamal Shah, because he is one person who's gone through all modalities of renal replacement. He started out with dialysis, hemodialysis. He had a transplant which rejected. He went on peritoneal dialysis. That got infected, then went on dialysis. Now he's on home dialysis. He runs a chain of dialysis units in India called NephroPlus. And I salute him for that because it requires a lot of willpower, guts, and people should actually talk to him, listen to him, and learn. Because one thing you must understand, when you have end-stage renal disease, it's not end of the world. We've got a lot of things we can do, but you have to be positive. That way, I think I salute Kidney Warriors Foundation, because when it started many years ago, there were only few people, but now we have got thousands of people as part of this foundation. I think it's very important that all of us work together. And at this juncture, I would like to say thank you, Kamal, for teaching me what to do in ESRD. Next slide, please. Now, if you look at again the success picture, the survival figures, how it tells you 1 year, 5 years, I'll come to the later on. Next slide. Again, it tells you my own figures. 1 year survival, 95. 25 years, 8%. So these are statistics. Statistics actually have no meaning in an individual case. Next slide. Next slide, please. Now, when you talk of transplantation, one of the things people should know is when you have a transplant, your immunosuppression or treatment is lifelong. Please understand, there is no question of stopping your medicine or adjusting your dose of medicine, reducing without proper supervision. So if you look at the drugs which are there, before cyclosporin, that is 1980s, only drug available was azathioprine, which used to be sold as Imuran and prednisolone. But now we have got many drugs. Next slide. But the commonest drug, this again tells you what are the drugs available in the market. I'm not going to go into detail. Rituximab, belatacept are now recently coming. Next slide. But what I would like you to know is the evolution of immunosuppression over the years. Unfortunately, none of the new drugs actually which are coming have really made much difference in this long-term survival. All the drugs have made some difference in the 1 year survival. If you look at the long-term survival, really not much change has occurred in my experience. Next slide. Now, these are the companies which have actually helped in getting new drugs. I know that people accuse the pharma companies, accuse the doctors of being in cahoots with the pharma company. But without pharma company, we cannot have new drugs. Let's be clear. So we have to work together. I know that pharma company is there for making money, but nevertheless, we need money to have new discovery, new research. And these are some of the important people who have actually helped in discovery of medicine. One is John Borrell. He worked for Sandoz, later on Novartis, and then he discovered cyclosporin. The other figure which you see is an Indian guy called Surendranath Sehgal. he actually discovered rapamycin. So that is now become sirolimus, everolimus. In fact, now rapamycin is used in cancer. More than kidney transplantation, rapamycin is anti-cancer, and a lot of oncologists use rapamycin or sirolimus. Next slide. But I should mention now about cyclosporin. I was telling you, I was very fortunate. I was trained in an era called before cyclosporin era or BC era. And now we have the era called after cyclosporin era. So when you talk of transplant drugs, for students, we tell them BC era, it's not before Christ. It is before cyclosporin era, and AC era after cyclosporin. And the picture there you see on the top is Dr. C.M. Tyagarajan, my senior colleague, also trained from Vellore. He is one of the earliest to use cyclosporin. In fact, he used cyclosporin on MGR, who had an unrelated transplant in United States. In fact, cyclosporin is one drug which actually made unrelated transplant successful. Before cyclosporin, the question of full tissue matching, best of match was needed. After cyclosporin, unrelated transplant came in. I'll come to the story later on. Next slide. Now, look at my own protocols. 87, I used to use only true drugs, azathioprine, prednisolone. Currently, my protocol is triple drugs. That is tacrolimus, mycophenolate, prednisolone. I do use little bit of cyclosporin and mycophenolate, but majority are on 3 drugs called tacrolimus, mycophenolate, prednisolone. Everolimus and sirolimus are not regularly used by me, but next slide. But my favorite is what is called as ARP regimen. That is Advagraph, azathioprine, prednisolone. These are actually 2 brothers. One is a neurosurgeon, Dr. Arjun Srivatsav, and his brother Anil Srivatsav. Actually, he's also a kidney warrior who has done a lot of work on organ donation. You can see Arjun after transplant playing golf. He's on Advagraph, which is actually a single dose tacrolimus. Azathioprine is an old drug. Prednisolone, all he takes in the morning, and he's doing well. He's now 7-8 years now doing well on these 3 drugs. Next slide. Now, one of the things which people keep asking me is, what is the safe drug in transplantation? As I keep saying, all drugs have got side effects. Anything which has got effect will have side effect. Homeopathy has no side effect because it has no effect. Any drug which has got effect will have side effect. So it is a question of how to use the drug. So I must pay respects to Dr. Egberg, late Egberg from Germany, who did a trial called the Symphony trial. And as per his trial, the best combination was low dose tacrolimus, mycophenolate, and steroids in the long term. Now, I am modifying a little bit by adding azathioprine instead of MMF because it also saves money. MMF TAC costs a lot of money, but if you use tacrolimus, azathioprine, and steroids, as suggested by my good friend Vijay Kher, the cost could go down. Next slide. Now, I want you to look at this picture now. 2 pictures, one on the top, one on the below. Top is actually Selena Gomez, well-known singer. She had an unrelated transplant. Her friend gave the kidney. It was possible because of drug like tacrolimus and cyclosporin. Without that, unrelated transplant would have not been possible. Look at the picture down, 1950. It had to be between twins. They were not on any drugs, but it had to be between twins. So the drug cyclosporin made a difference in doing transplants where there are no match and unrelated transplant were being done. Next slide. Now, all drugs, as I said, anything which has an effect will have side effect. The question now is, what are the side effects of transplantation? There's a good side, there's a bad side. There's nothing like perfect transplant, perfect drugs. Next slide. Now, when you use these drugs, all drugs have got side effect, I told you. One of the problems with cyclosporin, which we face, is hirsutism or hair growth. Especially young women, when they use cyclosporin, they get a lot of hair growth, and that can be quite difficult for us. With tacrolimus, the hair growth is more or less not there. Next slide. Again, one of the other problems with cyclosporin is what is called a gingival hypertrophy, or the gums start swelling. With tacrolimus, that problem is not there. Next slide. Again, this tells you how, gives you the story of Selena Gomez on tacrolimus, cosmetically definitely better. On the right side, you see my own patient who had 2 transplants and cosmetically on tacrolimus doing well. On the left side, an old patient, 20, 30 years ago, cyclosporin and hirsutism, it can be quite frightening, and tacrolimus that way is made a difference. But the problem with tacrolimus is it causes more diabetes compared to cyclosporin. So you've got to be careful, you've got to do drug level monitoring and follow your team advice. Next slide. Now, again, I must thank Dr. Vijay Kher. He has done a cost analysis of various scenarios in transplantation. How, according to him, using tacrolimus, azathioprine, steroids, the lowest cost, $1,500 in dollars it is per year. The highest would be using everolimus or sirolimus mycophenolate. But by and large, most of our patients are on tacrolimus, MMF, and steroids. But I have quite a few patients on TAC, azathioprine, and steroids where the cost could come down. Next slide. Now, I'm going to give you some stories of my own transplantation. These are some of my, next slide. These are some of my success stories which I have. Now you look at a police commissioner from Nigeria who had a transplant. Within a month of transplant, he got back to work. Then we have a Nigerian man who had 2 transplants with a heart transplant, with a heart surgery done. And then we have this Bangladesh Islamic scholar who had transplant doing well. Next slide. And some more success stories. I'm not going to go much into detail. These are all people who had transplant who visited me one day, and we just took a photograph for just showing records that they are doing well. Next slide. Now, one of the important questions a lot of times I get, is there an age limit for transplant? A child which is 4 years old or 5 years old, can they have a transplant? A man who is ET, can they have a transplant? Please understand, age per se is not a contraindication for transplant. Age is never a contraindication. There are other factors. People who are 20 or 30, I will not transplant. The 30-year-old man with cancer, I cannot transplant. 30-year-old man with active tuberculosis, I cannot transplant. But an 80-year-old man, I can transplant. So in this picture, you have a Chinese girl from Malaysia who was 5 years old. This was done, transplant was done 30 years ago. She's still doing well after 30 years. And down you have an 80-year-old man who had a transplant doing well. Next slide. So age is not a contraindication. Same with profession. You have a transplant, you can do whatever you want. You have a homemaker on the left who had transplant with me. Then I have an IG of police. She's the first lady IG of police, Fatima Begum from Bangladesh, had a transplant, doing well. So a lady police officer from Bangladesh doing well after a transplant. So any profession you can do after a transplant. It is not, nothing is taboo. Next slide. Now, also transplant patients, they take part in various sports. We have one Kedarnath who took part in the Transplant Olympics, and Sneha Raju, I'm sure she's also saying, she won the trekking, she won the Asian records also. I congratulate her. So it is possible. In fact, Sneha has had 2 transplants. One when she was just 5-6 years old, and another about 7-8 years ago when she was still a teenager. So that is the spirit we should have. It is possible to do anything after a transplantation. Next slide. This again tells you the story of Arjun Srivatsav, Anil Srivatsav, the brothers who were spearheading organ donation after transplant. They went to the Transplant Olympics in UK, and Arjun actually won the golf gold medal. Next slide. Now, if you go back to previous slide, one more slide. If you go back to the United States, this is actually Alonzo Mourning, is a famous basketball star who had a transplant, and after transplant, he got the star of the NBA. And I was fortunate. I was in Boston 10 years ago, and you can actually see me talking to Alonzo Mourning. I was taking an autograph for my son, who is a basketball lover. So I took an autograph from him. So it is possible, even after transplant, to play active sports, not just transplant Olympics. He was an active sportsman after transplantation. Next slide. Now, one other important thing, I think I would like to spend some time on this, because a lot of patients, whether men, women, after transplant, the question they ask is, can they get married? That's an important question. If they get married, can they have a normal sex life? Can they have children? Now, look at this lady with me. It's a very tragic story, I must tell you. This young lady came to me from Nigeria. She had a transplant. Her mother donated the kidney. Within a week of transplant, she lost the graft because she had a side effect to cyclosporin. Cyclosporin had caused thrombosis of the graft. I had to remove the transplant kidney. She had a lot of trust in us. She stayed back a couple of months more, and she had a second transplant. This time her brother gave the kidney, and I used a drug called sirolimus. I thought that would have less side effect, and she did very well. Couple of years down the line, she came back to see me and told me, doctor, that I want to get pregnant. And I said that if you are on sirolimus and mycophenolate, you have to change the drug. And I cannot change because you had problem with cyclosporin. So it is better that you don't go for pregnancy. She didn't listen to me. She told me that her husband said that if she doesn't have a child, husband would say he would get married again and he will kick her out. And she, without my knowledge, changed her medication. And within a few months, she lost the kidney and I lost her. So this is a heart-wrenching story which keeps haunting me. Even after 25 years, I keep thinking of this young lady. What could you have done? So please understand, pregnancy, even in a normal person, is not that safe. Pregnancy is physiological. It's what is considered. But we do see a lot of pregnancy-induced complication, not in transplant, normal women with pregnancy. So please understand, pregnancy has got risk factors. So it's not that a person who's had transplant cannot get pregnant. So I'll come into the details of that. Next slide, what we could do. Now, next slide. Now, these are some of my success stories of transplant ladies who have got pregnant or doing well. Any transplant person, a lady, can get pregnant with the supervision of the doctor concerned. Please understand. Ideally speaking, we say 2 years of normal kidney functions, and they are not on certain drugs which can damage the fetus, like a blood pressure medicine called ARB or mycophenolate. We stop that and change it to azathioprine. And normal blood pressure, we try to control and go on. For a man, this problem is not there. Within 6 months, he can have he can have a child. For a lady, I suggest normally 2 years. Some people are saying 1 year is enough, but I play it safe. But it's very important that the lady who wants to get pregnant does it in a center where there is a nephrologist and they can take care of high-risk pregnancy. Now, a lot of new centers are coming, so-called boutique centers, where they do only pregnancy. I would not recommend such a center to my family, even if they are not had transplant. I am not for that, because a transplant patient getting pregnant, it requires multi-specialty care. It is not just obstetrics. The child needs care, the mother needs more care than the child. So you need to have a nephrology team, you need to have a full team of hematologists, because so many things could occur with a pregnancy. So pregnancy is possible. A lot of pregnancy, successful pregnancy occurred. Now you look at the man here on this photograph. He's an Islamic scholar from Nigeria. He had transplant. After transplant, he married 4 times, had 8 children after that. So it is possible. Transplant, it's possible to have children. Men, it is easy. Women need to undergo a thorough checkup, and it's a teamwork. Next slide. Now this again, a story, a very important story of Rajani. She had transplant with me. She was on dialysis, doing very badly on dialysis. Every dialysis, she would have convulsions. And fortunately, she was engaged to a good man who said that he will marry her. And she was married while being on dialysis. I had to arrange an ambulance in the Kalyan Mandap. We had emergency technicians during the wedding. She had the dialysis, then she had a transplant. After transplant, she migrated to Australia. Then she had twin daughters, Anjana and Sanjana. The picture you see with young Anjana and Sanjana. Now, recently, last year, they came to see me. They considered me as their own grandparents. So these are some of the good moments we have as a nephrologist to see somebody doing well. And this is actually this lady, because she was in Australia, the pregnancy went off well. She had a lot of problems. After the delivery, she had what is called postpartum bleeding. A lot of bleeding, but that was controlled in a good center. She was taken care of. So it's important that if you want to have a children in a good center, high-risk pregnancy center, with the coordination of your transplant nephrologist is important. Next slide. Now, this is another very nice story where 2 transplant recipients of mine, one had transplant with my colleague, Dr. Tyagarajan from Nepal. They got married, and after that, I understand they had a child also. So these are some of the success stories. Next slide. Now, the question now comes is, I keep sharing this often. In fact, Vasundhara ji always quote this also on my behalf. Transplant is like marriage. Please understand. Marriage is a blessing for many. It's a curse for some, but a risk for all. It's an old Scottish saying by Sir Douglas Black. It is true. With a transplant, if it is working well, no infection, it's great. But it can be a curse. You have infection, your side effect of drugs, it could be a problem. But you've got to take the risk. Like most of us are married and taken the risk. Transplant also, we've got to take the risk. So that risk is important. But the question is, how much risk can we take? It's a difficult question. I'll come to that during the question answer session. Next slide, please. Now, this again tells you how I organize the sports meet for transplant patients. Some of my senior good friend colleagues, you can see Dr. Talwalkar is no more with us. Dr. Rana, the famous nephrologist from Gangaram Hospital. You can see Dr. Lloyd. And actually in one picture, you can actually see my second son, Gaurav, who is an interventional radiologist, now holding the plaque to give the medal to the winners. And you can actually see Vasu, who is one of the key members, Vasu Sandur, who is a key member of Kidney Warrior Foundation, winning the sports event. So I salute such people. Next slide, please. Now, what is the long-term survival of transplant? This is an important question people ask. Very important question. People tell me, they ask me, sir, if I do transplant, some people say it lasts only for 6 months, some 25 years. There is no statistically that way we cannot actually predict, but a lot of work has been done. One work is done by my friend, Dr. Hariharan. You can see his photograph down. Hari and me were trained together in Vellore. Hari is also a product of CMC Vellore. He's a big shot nephrologist in Pittsburgh. He's director of the Transplant Institute in Starzl Transplant Institute in Pittsburgh. And you can actually see Hari and Rajiv Gandhi from Miraj, another senior nephrologist. Hari actually did important work. He said creatinine is still the best marker of transplantation. The first year creatinine, if it's less than 1.2, then the survival in long term is good. This we knew 30, 40 years ago, but we had not done a study. So creatinine is important. In fact, you see the photograph of a model in that picture there. Next slide, please. I think, can we have the next slide? This again, creatinine is still the best marker for transplantation. You can actually see Hariharan, and you can see Dr. Rajiv Gandhi from Miraj. Hari is now the director of the Starzl Transplant Institute. He did an important study. He said, post-transplant first year creatinine predicts the long-term survival. If somebody's first year creatinine is less than 1.2, 1.3, they do well long-term. Now, again in Brazil, in the metros and other places, I understand they put everywhere, the models advertised say that, please check your creatinine. Creatinine is more important than cholesterol. A lot of people get obsessed with cholesterol. High cholesterol will not kill anybody. High creatinine will. So that is important. So now Hari did the study, and it became a landmark study and quoted by all of us, how creatinine, despite a lot of new markers have come in, creatinine still stays an important marker in assessing transplant kidney function. Next slide. Now, I will spend a few minutes on ethical and legal issues. Next slide. Now, if you do a Google search, next slide, and see transplant-related cases in Karnataka, you find many cases. At least 50% of them will involve me. Either I have sued somebody or somebody has sued me. That is the problem with transplant. This is one of the most regulated legal issues come in transplantation. Next slide. Now, this is a figure which tells you my own lifeline when you look at the transplantation. 1991, 1992, if you look at the figure, 1995, we had so-called kidney transplant scam in Bangalore. All of us doctors, nephrologists in Bangalore are accused of stealing kidney. The story was thousands of people came from Tamil Nadu to Bangalore, and their kidneys were harvested and sent to Saudi Arabia, exported to Saudi Arabia like pickles or chips. I don't know how that was possible. But now, after 20 years, the High Court actually passed a judgment saying that the whole story was wrong. No kidney theft was done. Actual problem was on payment of money. So that episode actually brought down the number of transplants. And even though we keep talking, how many transplants, what to do, so that had an impact on all the transplants all over India. So numbers actually came down. Next slide. Now, we had, when people talk of transplant tourism, a lot of patients, these are some of the patients who come from all over the world to me. So the question now is, before 95, many of them would come to India to get a donor. There would be an unrelated donor and they would have transplant. Now, after 95, these patients come to us with their own donors. They come with their related donor and we get a clearance from their High Commission or embassy and do the transplant. So we have helped so many countries that way. Next slide. Now, legally speaking, if you say, a lot of times now when I talk of transplantation, we always ask for a police clearance. But this is, when I talk to them police clearance, you must understand the world's first transplantation, successful transplantation, the donor and recipient had to go to the police station. I didn't know this. I just read that. And they actually did fingerprinting. So the police were involved from the first transplant onwards. So that's what is even happening now. The police were involved in the first transplant. And even after so many transplants, 40, 50,000 transplants, after 50 years, still we involve the police in our transplantation. Next slide. Now, this again tells you in 94, 95, after the so-called kidney episode, the Commissioner of Police called me and my colleague, Dr. Balal, who is the chairman of my hospital, to find out what exactly is happening. The newspaper actually put this photograph in one of their front pages saying, Commissioner of Police with two of the accused. So it was quite funny for me, actually, and it also made how the newspaper can react. Now we have got so many deaths, so many things going on. The newspaper have a heyday. Anything to do, anything news, they would all want to sell. So this was the news in those days. Next slide. In 1994, after the so-called Bangalore scam, the 1994 Human Organ Transplant Act was formed. This actually changed the entire scenario of transplant in India. The basic concept was redefine death. Before this act came in, death means heart has to stop. Cardiac arrest was important. After this, they changed the definition to brain death. Then they said, once you certify brain death, you can use the organs for donation. Then the third thing came in, preventing sale of organs. That is, commercial donation or taking money for organ was illegal. Next slide. So At that point of time, I had an interesting story. This was the grandfather who wanted to donate a kidney to the grandson. Now, this was not a related transplant. Only now, grandparents have come into close relatives. As per the old law, a grandfather is not related to the grandson. So this was a man from Bihar, Mishra. It was his son's son. He wanted to donate kidney and the government refused to give permission. So he actually went to the court. He himself argued in the court. He said, in my tradition, if I die, my grandson takes the funeral pyre and walks with me. I don't want the reverse to occur. I don't want to be carrying his funeral pyre. Please give me permission. So with a court order, I did transplant. The grandfather was 80 years old at the time. He lived for 15 years after that. And the boy is still going strong after 20, 30 years. So this is some of the legal problems we have. Next slide. Another legal problem I had, very interesting, where this man, he had kidney failure and the only donor available for him was his deaf and dumb brother who had 100% match. He could not give consent and the only breadwinner was this patient. The question was whether we could go out with the transplant. A lot of discussion went on. The mother, who is common to both, mother said, please take the kidney because if something happens to my son who is earning money, then the whole family is dead. The first thing is my daughter will throw me out, throw the other donor, other brother who is deaf and dumb. Please let us go out with the transplant. So we went to the court. Again, we had a judge who was quite proactive. He gave a judgment saying that in the interest of the donor, his argument was very simple. You are doing the transplant to protect the donor because if the recipient dies, the donor also would die because there is no breadwinner. Nobody will be there to take care of the donor. So in the interest of the donor, transplant can be done. So it hit the newspapers. Now it's actually, if you look at Ethics Journal, this is an important case, whether we should have done it or not. Now, 30 years down the line, I'm happy I did it because both are doing well and they come for follow-up. So after that, I have not even done one case because one of the argument was, if you do such a case, it will be a slippery slope. There will be a precedence. Every other patient will be a mental retarded donor. No, it has not occurred and we will not do it. So if we have a conviction that you are doing the right thing, we had the support of the media at that point of time. We had the support of Mothers Association and we took a lot of care to do the transplant. This is unique that way, but not common. Next slide. So this again tells you all the, at that point of time, all leading journals carry this article, a lot of ethics journals, whether what we did right or wrong. Both sides, some of them called us, what we have done is right. Some people called us cowboys. They still keep making fun of us. Nevertheless, I did what I thought morally in my mind is right. Next slide. Now this again, important thing to note, Jehovah's Witness. Now Jehovah's Witness are a group of people who will not take blood. Now whether we should do transplant for them, because during transplant, they may bleed and they may die. So we went ahead and did the transplant. Fortunately, nothing happened. But this is a question, ethical and legal. Please understand. Then we had another case very recently where a young girl, she wanted to donate kidney to the mother and she was engaged. The fiancé said, if you donate kidney, I will not marry you. She said she broke the engagement and donated the kidney. It's 1 year now, both are doing well. Now, these are moral dilemmas which occur to us. Please understand, I tell young nephrologists and surgeons, always do legal things. You can't do illegal things. Moral and ethical is a relative term. What is ethical and moral to me today will become immoral, unethical next year. Or what is to me, if it's an outsider, I can talk of ethics to somebody else because it doesn't involve me. So please understand, you cannot do illegal things. Ethical, moral, again, it's a question of relative things. And I always keep telling this, ethical issues do not solve problems. People solve problems. It is people who solve problems. Next slide. Now, we have one of the problems we have in transplant is limited organ source. Because of this, you have so-called kidney scam. Every year you have kidney transplant racket bursted, kidney scam, kidney stolen. These things keep going on. How do we solve the problem? Next slide. My own view. One way is to increase the deceased donor transplant. That is cadaver transplantation. This is my own experience 20 years ago. You can see me. Actually, those days, there's nothing like green corridor. You can actually see me taking kidney from Dr. Rebecca Thomas from St. John's Medical College to Lakeside Hospital. We didn't have an ambulance. I had to take that in my own Santro car and took the kidney and did the cadaver transplant. And the cadaver transplant went on for 8-10 years well. So this is one of the earliest cadaver transplants in Karnataka, and no green corridor, no ambulance, nothing. And we went ahead. But now things have changed. Lots of things have changed. And institutions like Mohan Foundation, Noto, they're all, Jeevan Sarthakate, they're all doing great work. But nevertheless, the numbers are less. Next slide. And when you talk of green corridor, now we have helicopters, you have got aircrafts taking the kidneys, and it comes on everyday news. You have celebrities endorsing. So things have changed. But still the numbers are less. The number of cadaver transplant or disease donor transplant we are doing now is far less, and we could actually increase by creating awareness and talking about it. Next slide. Now, the other thing is ABU incompatible transplant. I told you when I started off, blood group compatibility is important. So one other way we can increase the transplant is doing ABU incompatible transplant, also called domino transplant, swap transplant. These are all being done, but numbers are still less. I have also done a few, many centers are doing, but numbers still less. We need to do more. If you want to solve the shortage of organ donation, we need to do more. Next slide. Now, this is a very contentious question. This is actually a quote by Dr. K.C. Reddy, my colleague, transplant surgeon. He is now retired from Chennai. He said, to buy or let die. Now, this is a question which keeps coming in my mind. Should we pay money to a donor? Should organ sales be allowed? What to do? This is a commentary which goes on. I have my own views on that. It may be right or wrong. Next slide. And I have got some colleagues, Sally Satel. If you look at the picture down, Sally is a well-known psychiatrist and renowned. She keeps talking on organ donation. She had an unrelated donor transplant. Her friend gave her a kidney in US. That was 15 years ago. Now second transplant also. She's got a friend who donated. And she keeps saying how we got to give some money or some compensation to the donor. A donor is the one who sacrifices most. If you look at any transplantation, everybody gets a benefit. The recipient gets the benefit of the organ. The doctor, the surgeon gets paid. The hospital gets paid. It is a donor who doesn't get anything. So donor has to get in some form, if not money, some recognition. I think donors are heroes. They need to get some recognition. So my own suggestion, next slide, the donor should get in some form, if not money, some sort of equivalent of Padma Shri. They'll get a gold medal. With the gold medal, a kidney donor will get free train trip, concession, like the armed forces people get 50% discount on flights. A kidney donor should get tax exemption, something free. Some sort of incentive is needed. Also, most important, a donor who donates kidney should be high up on the waiting list for donation if he or she gets kidney failure. That's important. Donors do develop kidney failure. It's not unknown. So if they develop kidney failure, if they require a transplant, they should go high up on the list. And probably the hospital which is doing the transplant should give some discount, help them out. So we need to remove the disincentive for organ donation. That's what I did in Singapore in an interview about 10 years ago. Next slide. We discussed how to go about it. In fact, Singapore has now got a fund. A government has made a fund. So people who donate kidney, whether related or unrelated, will get paid. Please understand, a person who is related, whether it's close relative or not, or a friend, all are donors who are heroes, who need to be compensated in some form, who need to be treated well. Next slide. Now, this again, we had a meeting in Manila and we produced a paper, about 25 hours all over the world, met together, and we produced the paper and published what we called it as incentives for organ donation, proposed standards for internationally acceptable system. We are not talking of sale. We are not saying that you go buy a kidney, purchase, black market. No, we are talking of some sort of regulation where the government and like we can say Kidney Warrior Foundation, they will come in, they will supervise, and some sort of compensation is given to the donor, and the incentives are done in an ethical and legal way. Next slide. Now, what about other newer advances? What more can we do for shortage? One is cloned kidney. That is growing a kidney in the lab. It is still in the lab. It is still not coming. Other is called xenotransplant, actually stem cells. My colleague, Dr. Balal, is the chairman of a company which we run in Manipal called Stemputics. It is possible. I think still research is going on, but I don't know when it will become commercial. Xenotransplant is one thing which still has got hope. These are actually pigs called transgenic pigs. Human genes are introduced in the pigs and their organs are used. How long this will take, I don't know, but still there is hope. And some point of time, I don't know if it will occur in my lifetime, but I think some point of time, there may be some hope. Next slide. Printing a human kidney. This is again, I just read somewhere, this is possible, I don't know. They printed the kidney, but it's not a functional kidney. But they say at some point of time, they will be able to get, which can be used for treatment purposes. Next slide. Now, before I end the last few slides, I've talked to you on ESRD, CKD. It's a costly treatment. A country like India cannot afford giving free treatment to all of us. I quote Dr. Mani, who has done a lot of work on preventing CKD, going to community levels, where he says just going to villages, checking the blood pressure, checking a simple urine test, diagnose early kidney disease, treat, you can prevent kidney failure. And my guru, Padma Bhushan, Dr. B.M. Hegde, I always quote him, he says, swasthasya swastha rakshitam, keep the well healthy. It's very important that good lifestyle, what is actually causing more of kidney failure, heart attack, is bad lifestyle. Good diet control, good exercise, smoking, no smoking, and reducing your salt. All this could go in the long way. I think we have to spend more time on preventing kidney disease rather actually spending more and more on treatment, especially on the government side. No government in the world can afford free dialysis transplant lifelong. So it's important for prevention. Next slide, please. Now, one of the things which caught me is the quote by Albert Einstein. I fear the day that technology will surpass our human interaction. The world will have a generation of idiots. Albert Einstein. Now, this is very important. Robotic transplants are there. We are doing robotic transplant. But look at the role of a nephrologist. That's the question commonly asked. As a nephrologist, I don't go and cut. I don't operate. What is my role? I always said my role is prayer. I pray every time as patient has a transplant or not, prayer. So the human touch, I think that is very important. Heart of healing with human touch. Now, thanks to COVID, we are not able to do that. We are doing video consult. I'm still old-time physician. I'm still not very happy with video consult. I would like to see my patient, talk to them, touch them, and get that relationship. I don't know when that's going to come back, but that cannot go away. How much our advance occurs, a human touch is needed, more so in a transplantation. Next slide. Now, as a nephrologist, our aim is, I always want patients to make a lot of urine. This is a slide you will see on the left where patient comes to me with no urine, has a lot of money, then has a transplant, spends a lot of money, goes back with no money, with a lot of urine. But then you have the Chinese. I think they have overtaken us on making urine. Next slide. And I would like to thank Dr. Balal, my good friend, classmate, and chairman, for allowing me to work with him in Manipal Hospital. And we have Dr. Dubey, who is my present transplant surgeon, who also does robotic transplant. Next slide. And I end my slide with this: I love you with all my kidney. I think this is very important. We always say, I love you with my heart. You can't donate your heart when you're alive, but when you are alive, you can definitely donate your kidney to your boyfriend, girlfriend, whoever, mother, sister, whatever. You can donate your loved one. In fact, the question commonly asked is, why has God given 2 kidneys? My answer is, God has given 1 kidney for you, the other is for donation. I think that is my answer. Next slide. I would like to end by quoting my favorite author, Dr. Devdutt Patnaik, who also happens to be an anesthetist and now become a mythologist. He says, who sees it all? Varuna has 1,000 eyes. Indra has 100. You and I only 2. I have only 2 eyes. And the last 40 years, whatever I thought was relevant in my field, I have discussed with you. If I hurt somebody or done something wrong, please forgive me. Thank you very much. What, Marian, we take questions?
Yes, Doc. Doc, thank you very much. I think that was a phenomenal presentation. The stories were beautiful. I had goosebumps actually hearing the stories. And I just loved every bit of your presentation. Thank you so much for that beautiful presentation. Without further delay, I'm going to dive into questions that we've been receiving live on Facebook. And let me just, some of the questions have already been covered in your presentation itself. Correct. I might just say it in case I missed out something. So the first question is, Doc, there's obviously pre-work done between the donor and the recipient.
Correct.
Before the transplant is done. Then what causes rejection at the early stage if the pre-work?
It's a very good question, and a lot of patients come and ask me. Everything has been done. So when you look at the history of transplant, I told you that drug cyclosporine made a difference. A lot of patients at that time, patient would come from Saudi Arabia, Malaysia, China, wherever, and they would have a kidney from Tamil Nadu. No connection at all. And even after 30 years, they are doing well. No match, nothing, except a simple cross match. I have had patients where the best matched transplant done, and the next day the kidney rejects. Still, our science has not grown so much to really analyze and tell who kidney will work, who will not work. We have done a lot of things, a lot of cross-match, new technologies arrived, new things have come in. To some extent, we can guess. But by and large, we are still groping we still don't know. So the question is, what do we do? How do we say which kidney will reject, which will not? Now, most of the time when you do a cross match, if there is what is called preform antibodies, where we say cross match is positive, the chance of rejection are high. We have to be careful. We treat and go ahead. So that is one point. But despite all that, everything being negative, perfect, still the transplant may not go on well. One of the things, the problem with transplant is also technique, the experience of the surgeon, because it is done by hand. Even if you use robo, the technique, and sometimes when you actually join, these are human beings actually joining the vessels. Some stitch may go in and there may be a clot. This we may not know. It may come after so many years, we don't know. But by and large, technique has now evolved. People have become experts. The surgical aspect is well advanced. But to answer your question in a simple way, still after 35 years, so many transplants, I cannot predict which transplant do well. In fact, many of my colleagues, very close to me, Dr. Tyagarajan, Dr. Vijay K. Rana, I keep talking to them in private. They always tell me, Sundar, most scared I am, is, which is true, somebody who's very close to me. I want to do everything. I have done free. They don't do well. I've taken everything. I've given my heart, soul. And when they don't do well, we don't know why. And they also know we have done the best. Sometimes we don't do anything. In fact, we might have even done something wrong. They do very well. I don't know how. So I think somewhere faith is important, whether you trust in God or whatever. I think transplant is something I keep saying, in my experience, is something divine. In fact, the relationship between the doctor and the transplant patient is not commercial. I mean, I take money, but that's not so. For me, my patient is my family. I would like to do best. And when they have so much trust in me, actually, my my anxiety goes up. In fact, I had a heart attack when I was 49. My wife keeps telling me, it's because of all the tension you're taking, you had a heart attack. Maybe, it may be possible, but that's the way it is. So nobody knows clearly, despite all tests, why some kidneys work very long, why some don't. Nobody actually knows the answer. That's why I keep saying, it's like marriage. How do you say? No marriage, arranged marriage, still it fails, we don't know. Okay?
Doc, the second question is pretty much connected to the first question, but I'm still going to mention it. Most patients assume that the transplanted kidney lasts for longer, and the protein behind it is mainly diet. While I understand that nobody with science has not yet come to a level where we can decide how long the kidney lasts, but knowingly, can you tell me what are the things that would probably go on? Like you spoke about creatinine in the first 1 year, which is great information. What are the other things that we could consider so that we know that knowingly we can do something to make the kidneys last? Yeah.
The most important thing is that I keep saying transplant patient is married to the transplant team. It's not a happy marriage. If I die, they have to get somebody else. Please understand. So follow your transplant team's protocol to the core. The medicines which are taken for transplant are lifelong. If you want to reduce the medicine or change, or you go to some other center, the doctor treating should know that you are a transplant patient and you are on these drugs. Because some of the medicines which is given for other conditions, like now you have COVID, they use azithromycin. When you use such a drug, the levels of the drugs will go up. Some drugs will bring down the transplant medication level and you could have rejection. So following the drug protocol, knowing the drugs. In fact, I like patients who come and tell me, these are the drugs, they come and tell me the dose, they know everything. But there are some patients where they will not tell anything. It's a wife or somebody else telling me this medicine. This is not good. In my opinion, when it comes to health, you have to be selfish. You have got to know, even if you're illiterate, please know your medicines. I know that the wife or husband is taking care, but don't just depend on them. You have to know your medicines. You cannot say red medicine, green medicine. You have to know the names. You have to know. Things are changing. I'm not saying no, but that is important. The second question is diet. I think is very important. More than actual protein or salt and anything, hygiene I think is very important. Because transplant patient, especially in the first 6 months, is immunosuppressed. The immunity is low. At this point of time, if they go to a place where there is no hygiene, mostly uncooked food, salads, these are all very dangerous. Go to a chaat shop where it's not cooked. Very tempting. Even a normal person will have problem, will have gastroenteritis. In fact, India, one of the common cause of kidney failure is gastroenteritis because of poor hygiene, because we don't have good water. So that is important. Following good hygiene. Now, that way I thank COVID, because at least we have some sort of sanitation. We are not spitting, we are washing hands. I think that's good that way. But same COVID, all of us are following. A transplant patient should follow from the beginning what we are doing, hand sanitation, mask. So it's very interesting. When I started transplant in Vellore in 1980s, everybody would wear a mask. Down the line, the mask was removed. But I was always feeling that mask was needed. I would always tell my patient, when you go in a crowd, wear a mask. When you come to the hospital, wear a mask. Not at home. Same thing now. Mask is important. People are saying that if you wear a mask, TB is coming down. No, yesterday I read in the literature that the incidence of tuberculosis is actually coming down because people are wearing masks. So I think mask is important in that way. When you talk of diet, good hygiene is important. Also lifestyle. I think eating too much of salt, eating pickles, too much of fried food. I think putting on weight. These are things. Smoking, definitely. 100% smoking is taboo. Question is alcohol. Can I have alcohol? I think if you talk to Western doctors, they all allow alcohol. Some beer, whiskey is allowed. I don't think that has got so much of problem to the kidney, maybe to the liver. So it's okay. But I'm not saying everybody should go start drinking every day. That's not the thing. But in moderation, in a way, social drinking should be okay in my mind. It is not so dangerous. But the most important thing is regular follow-up. I have patients who are not come for follow-up for 5 years, suddenly not even once they've done the creatinine. So even if you are not seeing a doctor, please do your kidney functions. We have a protocol. The first 3 months, twice a week. Next 3 months, once a week. Next 3 months, once in 2 weeks. Next 3 months, once in 3 weeks. Next, once a month for a year. Then once in 3 months for the next year. Then once in 3 months, lifelong. This is the follow-up you have to do. Or if you get some fever, some problem, please do your kidney functions. You have a headache, you have fever, please get your kidney functions done because that is important in a transplant. So that awareness, working with your transplant team is important. I know that a lot of patients now put on Facebook, my doctor suggested this and all that. As far as possible, I as a doctor would not like to comment on another transplant patient from another team because I believe that a drug which works in my hand will not work with somebody else's hand. Despite the protocols and all that, for some reason, it is something which is unique. You talk to any transplant physician, they will tell you what works in their hands will not work in somebody else's hand. So as far as possible, if you can have a good rapport with your transplant team, I know transplant doctors are busy, they're not easy, but I'm sure most of my colleagues whom I talk, everybody wants help. So develop a rapport with the doctor. Please understand, most of us want to do good only. We do make money. It's not that nothing is free, but that is not our only aim. We want to help people. We definitely want to do something and help people. That is important. That trust we have to develop. I think that is going off. In the last 30 years, what I'm saying is, last few years, 5, 10 years, the trust between doctor and patient has gone up. There is no trust. I think that we have to win back. And the fault is doctors also. I'm not blaming the patient. We doctors are also responsible. We are on the same side. I am on the same side of the patient. And all doctors should think of that. And we have to work on that. Okay.
Thank you, Doc, for that answer. The next question is there an ideal time gap between the first transplant and the second transplant if the first transplant had a rejection?
Is a very good question. So again, depends on what type of rejection. See, I told you the story of the young girl who had a transplant first, and because of cyclosporin, she lost the kidney. Second transplant, I did within a month using sirolimus. So if it is the non-rejection case, it is not a hyperacute rejection. It is thrombosis due to something or some technical failure. We can do within a few weeks, not a problem. Again, the rejection depends on the type of rejection. Also, if the cause of the kidney failure is some sort of vasculitis, we call active disease, we can't transplant at the time, we wait. But by and large, in a couple of months, nothing happens. In 3 months' time, once you have a transplant, many of our patients have had within a couple of months. There's nothing like time frame, you should wait 6 months, 1 year, not needed. I don't think it's needed. But it depends on what is the cause of kidney failure, what type of rejection, there's vasculitis, what is the cause, that has to be decided.
Doc, can I share the case study of this patient? The patient had a rejection of the first transplant and was, the patient was pregnant. The TAC levels had gone down. The patient delivered a still baby as premature in the 7th month. The patient lost her kidney, and now the doctors advised that it's ideally better for her to do 1 year of dialysis and then do the next transplant. And the reason being is to filter the antibodies. So can you say something on this case?
No, I think that's what I said. See, if the antibodies, the rejection is due to antibody-mediated rejection, if the antibodies are still there, it is dangerous to do the transplant.
Doc, can I ask another question based on that? Is there any other ways to remove the antibodies like plasmapheresis or something?
It is possible, yes. It is, there are plasmapheresis, rituximab. There are many methods, but the problem is all those methods also reduce immunity and chance of infection are high. So you have to balance. Now, especially with this COVID time, I would be a little careful. I will not use that much of immunosuppression because they are prone for infection. Okay. So using plasmapheresis or rituximab, the immune system comes down, it gets hit, and they're prone for something else. So it's safer to be on dialysis than have a transplant. So we have to weigh the pros and cons and take a call. That's my suggestion.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Doc. Thank you for that answer.
And especially other thing I would say, if somebody is actually doing well on dialysis, they should not hurry up for a second transplant. Unless they have vascular access problem, they are not tolerating dialysis, then the story is different. Okay.
Doc, a very simple question, but for a second transplant, will the protocols be different or the to-dos be different when compared to the first transplant?
It's a very good question, because the second transplant, again, depends on what is the cost for the first transplant, what caused it, and what caused the failure of the first transplant. Understand? Definitely, second transplant is technically more challenging. You need a surgical team which has done second transplant, because it's either put on the other side. If the first transplant on the right side, second we put on the left side, third transplant they put in the center, sometimes they remove. So technically it's more challenging. And a second transplant also, chance of antibodies are higher compared to a first transplant. So that antibodies cross-match, these are factors that decide. But we have had, in the last 35 years, I have had many patients who have had second, third transplant doing well. So proper planning, in fact, I would say more planning is needed for a second transplant than first. Definitely, there's no question at all. But one thing is, because patient has already gone through first transplant, they understand the protocol. It's easier for me because they know the whole process. Okay.
Thank you, Doc. My next question for you is, what are the vaccines that are very important for a transplanted patient? And you can also touch upon the current time. If the COVID vaccine comes out, is it important as preference that a transplanted patient goes and take it? You can take the questions together.
See, I ideally would suggest all vaccination is done pre-transplant when they are on dialysis. In fact, in a transplant, what happens, the immunity is low. So whenever you give a vaccine, the immune system doesn't react so much, so the vaccine may not work. But definitely certain vaccines are taboo, what we call as live vaccines. Some vaccines are live, like yellow fever vaccine. They are live vaccine, you cannot give, so you have to avoid that. Understand? Coming of COVID vaccine, nobody knows what vaccine it is, whether it's live or dead. Only when it comes, we'll know. But other vaccination, like hepatitis B, influenza, all that I advise my patients to take. But I would suggest all of the vaccines to be taken pre-transplant when you're on dialysis. Finish the vaccination course pre-transplant as far as possible. And then think of, if you missed out something, don't take live vaccines. Vaccines which are inactivated or dead vaccines you can take. Okay.
Thank you, Doc, for that. Okay. Why does some patients have high BP post-transplant? I have a couple of questions added to this question, but you can give me the base answer of why does some people have high BP?
There is a study which is done. In fact, 90% of all transplant patients will have high blood pressure. Let's be clear. If you look at the drugs, no, seldom I have seen any transplant patient having no antihypertensives or no blood pressure medicines. 90% of my patients have some sort of BP medication. Why? Because one is they are on steroids, that itself increases blood pressure. They are on cyclosporin or tacrolimus, which again constricts the blood vessels, which cause the blood pressure to go up. And also, patients, once they have transplant, their appetite improves, they eat more salt, they put on weight, all this adds to the thing. So the simple thing is, all my patients, most of them will have blood pressure, but it's easily controllable. With 1 or 2 drugs, it's easily controllable. With diet control, it is possible to control. But there are certain other causes where the blood supply to the kidney, where it's called the renal artery, the donor kidney is put in the iliac fossa, that artery may be narrow, and that can cause severe blood pressure. So if the blood pressure is not easily controlled, they may need some tests. They may need to meet the vascular surgeon. They may have to do a Doppler. That's why we keep doing regular Doppler and see whether any blood supply problem is there. And there may be other causes also which could cause the blood pressure to go up. But by and large, these are the common causes. One is the drugs which cause, and the diet which causes the blood pressure. Okay.
Doc, so what if a patient's a transplanted patient's BP is normal post-transplant? Okay, would you still recommend that they continue the regular dose of medicines, or would you recommend that they test their BP, and if it's normal, they don't take their medications? And what would you recommend in this?
There is what we say, there's an American saying, if ain't broken, don't fix it. If it's not broken, don't fix it. If the blood pressure is normal, why would I? No, unnecessarily don't take too many drugs. Okay. If my patient after transplant blood pressure is 120/80 without any drugs, no need to give any drugs for the blood pressure. I don't give. If the blood pressure goes to 140, 90, again I check. Now what we have started doing is ambulatory blood pressure at home, not just one reading. Because they come to see me, they are frightened of me, blood pressure goes up. You know, the white coat hypertension, not that. So we now use regularly home-based monitoring of blood pressure. If it's still high, then I treat. But I don't treat anybody who's got blood pressure 120, 80. I will not treat. It's not needed, in my opinion. Don't add too many drugs. Already there are so many drugs. Don't do that. So don't do anything unnecessarily.
An additional point to this, what if the person had a cardio disease like an aortic dissection or something? Would you still say if the BP is normal, don't take any medications?
No, again, the cardiologist dealing with that will decide.
Okay.
Because blood pressure is what is ideal for that. But definitely the person who's got cardiac problem will be on aspirin, cholesterol medicine, statins, all that you have to take. Is unconnected with transplant. Patient who has had an angioplasty would be on antiplatelet drugs, will be on cholesterol medicine, diabetic medicine. All those will continue irrespective of the transplant.
Doc, you shared a photograph of a beautiful singer, and the question is related to her. A patient who's lost her kidney through an autoimmune disorder, maybe amyloidosis or lupus, is it worth having a transplant again? Will the autoimmune disease might damage the kidney again? What would you recommend in this?
I think lupus is the commonest autoimmune disease we see, and the best lupus nephritis is called systemic lupus nephritis. That is the commonest autoimmune disease. And by and large, if they go for end-stage renal disease, we do transplantation. Transplant is ideal. And interestingly, the medicines we use in transplant, like tacrolimus, mycophenolate, steroid, these are the drugs used in the vasculitis or autoimmune disease. So by and large, the recurrence should be less when used in adequate doses, when used properly. So if you don't do, then they are on dialysis, isn't it? Being on dialysis is not easy. So the answer is, even if they have autoimmune disease, I will recommend transplant and I'll monitor them better and take care. The drugs need to be adjusted, but transplant can be done. That's the answer.
So you recommend a transplant, right?
Yes, yes.
Thank you, Doc, for that answer. Doc, I'm going to ask you a question on myths of fitness post-transplant.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, people are very confused post-transplant. Can they get back to fitness? Is it healthy? Is it good? With a special consideration to core or ab workout. Is it a specific time that you don't do core or ab workouts through yoga or anything like that? What is your take on that, Doc?
So I would definitely any sort of contact sports we don't do. But in the exercise, the first 3 months, I would ask them to be careful, not bending. That's what surgically, that's ideal. After that, they can do most of the things which normal person can do. There's no restriction on that. Because, many of my patients actually after transplant, they've gone to regular fitness, doing whatever it takes. But you have to be careful with contact sports, definitely, where it involves somebody hitting you on the abdomen, or that sort of thing should be avoided. And in about 6 months' time, they can get back to normal activity.
I was going to ask you a question on pregnancy post-transplant, but I think you so beautifully covered the subject itself. I'm still going to just put across the question. So the case study was the lady was transplanted, got pregnant, premature baby, still baby, lost the kidney. I'm just asking you, so will it be completely impossible for the person to have a second normal pregnancy in a second transplant if she has a second transplant?
See, I keep telling you honestly, for me, any pregnancy, even without a transplant, I'm scared as a nephrologist because I keep seeing complications of pregnancy. Pregnancy, in my opinion, is not normal. In fact, with a transplant, now recently, the same question, I had a lady who had a transplant, young lady. First transplant, we lost the kidney within a few weeks. Then she went for a second transplant. Now, she wants to have a baby. She's married 2 years, she wants to have a baby. And I personally feel that she should not have a baby because she's already had second transplant. Because with pregnancy, a lot of things change. The immune system changes. It is not normal. Let's be clear. There are problems. Nobody can say it will not occur. So if I keep the example, if it's my daughter, what would I do? I would say no. In fact, I now brainwashed her to go for a surrogacy. Now she's having a surrogate child. And even she wanted to donate her ova. But for donating the ova, she will be stimulated, hyper-stimulated with hormones. Even that, I have had 1 or 2 cases where the kidney is rejected because of the hormones used for hyperstimulation. So I'm scared. So I'm still the old school of thought. I think the child is important, no question at all. Go for surrogacy or adopt as far as possible. But if they're desperate, quite a few have had transplant, but it is to be done under full supervision. A high risk, it is a high risk pregnancy because this lady lost her, this thing. They can actually lose life also. They can have postpartum bleeding. They can have HELLP syndrome. So many problems. So it should be done as a teamwork. So by and large, pregnancy for a lady after transplant is not easy, but we would allow with certain conditions. With a man, that problem doesn't occur. Even with sex, question is how quickly, after this is not normally discussed. It's a taboo topic. A lady, when can she have sex? For me, I would say 3 to 6 months time. For a man, there's no problem. Within a few weeks, no problem. Again, we have what is called women on top. I tell them that is another position. These are things we should actually have a website or somewhere where a lot of youngsters are getting married, getting transplant. This is not discussed. This is taboo. In fact, I want to spend some time, but already somebody started talking something else. So the whole story went off the other way. But this is important also. Important. Maybe we should have a website or some books or brochures to help them out. This is important.
I completely agree with you on that topic of considering it taboo, and probably we should have a session on this topic itself where we have young transplanted patients to come in and understand this subject.
Right.
Doc, we are coming to one of our last few questions. I think, again, this is a question that you kind of generally covered in your own presentation. We're talking about drugs, tacrolimus drugs that are available in the market, Pangraph, Prograph. Is there a difference in their compositions? Why is it certain doctors recommend a few drugs? Is it because side effects, or is it just like you mentioned?
I will give you a trade secret. Now, all the drugs, the tacrolimus is made in India, they come only from 2 or 3 sources.
Okay.
The generic drug, which is actually comes either from Biocon or Madras Pharma or something, and then they put their own brand or tablet it and send it. Except for the original brand tacrolimus, which is Prograph from Aster Labs, other brands are all locally bulk purchased as powder and made. So, but the question is how they make it. Now, what our own Indian Society of Transplant, Dr. Vijay Kain is actually one of the leaders in that. What we have suggested is, if you are using a generic brand, that is an Indian-made brand, use the same brand, don't change. Because brand to brand absorption levels keep changing. So if you are using, say, Pangraph X today, don't change to something else without your doctor's permission, because you are used to that sort of absorption levels. So you got to do levels regularly. One advantage is we can do levels with tacrolimus. With mycophenolate, we don't have that. We can't do levels except CMC Vellore. Nowhere level is done. In fact, CMC did a study, Dr. George T. John, the mycophenolate, the sodium, mycophenolate sodium, different brands, and he found most of them absorption was bad, the Indian ones. So we are scared. So, whereas tacrolimus, we can actually do the levels and we can do. My suggestion is, your doctor most of the time would go by what are good companies. There are all 3 or 4 or 5 companies which is getting the source from somewhere and doing it. And also there are companies which support some patient. They'll tell me, doctor, I'll give 1 year free medicine. So we go on that also. It's not just that. So these are some of the things. But I would say my quick answer to this is, go by your doctors, have faith in your doctor, but do regular drug levels. If levels are not all right, your doctor will do. Ideally speaking, everybody will go on so-called original Prograph, the original innovator brand. That is ideal. But that is expensive. But now the costs are coming down. Because of the cost factor, Indian drug companies are doing good job. Not that they're not doing good job. My suggestion is stick to your doctor's advice. As far as possible, stick to same brand. But by chance, you don't get, this is what happened to my Bangladesh patient. Because of COVID, they were not getting the Indian brand. I said, don't stop. At least take the local Bangladesh brand, but do the level. Every week, do the level. Talk to your doctor and adjust. That's what you should do. Okay.
This is a question that just come up now on Facebook. I'm going to read it out. IBP post-transplant, what should be done? Okay, great. You mentioned that. I've got a transplant done in April 2016, facing rejection. Sister was the donor. Creatine settled at 1.8 in 6 months. Now it is between 2.5 and 2.8. What do you suggest in such a case?
No, depends on what the biopsy suggests. Actually, we will do a biopsy, whether it's rejection or whether it is a drug toxicity. Sometimes, or it can be what is called BK virus. So unless we know what is the thing, we cannot suggest. We need to know the biopsy, and based on the biopsy, we can suggest treatment. If it's a rejection, we give anti-rejection treatment. If it's due to excess dose of drugs, we can reduce the drugs. If it's due to BK virus or CMV, we can give antiviral. That's how we have to go about it. Okay.
Somebody's also asked a question on eyes, and that reminded me. So my husband was transplanted last year, and a few months after transplant, he was, I think, diagnosed with cataract, but not come to a situation to do a surgery. So the question over here, somebody's asked us, Doc, how do we take care of our eyes post-transplant, especially in the current period when people are working on a system for almost 10 hours a day? And so is there something you have to suggest on this now?
I think the best answer would be with an ophthalmologist. But by and large, I think I keep seeing some advertisement putting some Ayurvedic eye drops. I'm not suggesting that. But I think cutting screen time will be one option.
Okay.
That is one option. And most of the time, because they are on steroids, that is the reason the premature cataracts come in. See, most of the patients who had cataracts, premature, it's because of the steroids. And the question now is whether we should give steroids. I am a firm believer of steroids. I don't believe in steroid-free therapy. More so now in the COVID time, I think steroids are important. So there are certain side effects, inevitable side effects. We have to accept it. There is no way about it. If you don't take that, kidney will reject. It's worse being on dialysis than being on little. A lot of people come and tell me steroids causes diabetes. It's better to be little diabetic and not be on dialysis. I would prefer you on some insulin and be with a good kidney rather than being on dialysis. So we have to balance both, how to go about it. I think the best would be the transplant team works with them and works on that. It's not easy, but that's the best way. Okay.
Based on your presentation, somebody said, Doc, you mentioned something on how to investigate a eye TLC, trying to find out the root cause post-transplant. August 2nd, it was 13.3.
The total count.
Yeah, Doc.
No, that's actually the total count again, in the transplant varies because once you give steroids, the count goes up. And then once you give mycophenolate, that will bring down the count. If you have a CMV infection, that will bring down the count. And if you give treatment for CMV, the bowel cancer, that also brings down the count. So many factors are there. 13,000 is actually not bad. In fact, I would say a high count is safer than a low count. If somebody's count is 2,000, I'm more worried. Somebody's is 13,000, I'm not worried, being honest, because that is more dangerous. And there are so many factors, so many drugs are there. Any infection can increase the count. So you have to investigate like that. And sometimes if the count is going up or going down, we take the help of a hematologist. They may do a bone marrow or find out what's happening. So the teamwork is important that way. Okay.
And I think I'm going to end this session by asking you the last question, Doc. I said most of the time I heard your doctors telling patients to do a transplant so that they come back to at least close to normal life. But unfortunately, I see a lot of my fellow mates from my own community who have done transplants but still live a life of fear. And, they really don't celebrate lives. Even the smaller joys of life is just taken away from them. And I feel really bad that the whole point of doing a transplant is gone. And I know that you look at the disease from a holistic perspective. So I'm going to request you to give them some advice on this, please.
See, I think it's very easy for me to advise, but now actually when I look at the COVID era, I'm actually like a transplant patient now, sitting at home. I want to go out and meet everybody, but my children are saying, don't go. If you die, I can't see your body. Don't go, Dad. So it is similar to that. I mean, easy to preach, but by and large, I would say that once you finish about 6 months of transplant, your drug levels are low and your creatinine is okay, you can lead a near normal life. With near normal life, I'm not saying normal life, you have to have certain precautions like avoiding crowd, dust, eating properly, hygiene. I think if you follow, transplant patients are doing everything. You got Rajinikanth, who start transplant, not even talking about it. You got so many people who are transplant doing great. I mean, they're doing things which you can't even imagine they're doing. So I think some amount is there in the mind. I think fear of the disease is worse than the fear. Living in fear, I think, is worse. So I think that way I would send a positive message. Please be normal, follow the doctor's advice, regular checkup. At the same time, lead a good life. Because even if you're not at transplant, what can you say? Nobody can predict how long we're going to live.
Absolutely.
We can die of a road accident. I will tell you at this point of time, I know a case where one guy had 7 transplants.
Wow.
7 transplants. And the 7th transplant worked for 10 years and he died. You know how he died? He was going in a car and the car had a puncture. He was trying to change the tire and he got hit by a lorry and died. After 7, it's a true story. I mean, nothing connected to transplant. This could have occurred even So these things, death is not in our hands. That way, let's be philosophical to some extent. Let's accept that death is not in our hands, but we have to follow certain protocols, what we know scientifically, and lead a good life. And more so with the COVID era, it has taught us also that hygiene is important, value life. I think people like you should motivate. I mean, I learned from you when you were talking about parenting. You're talking about how you got to lead your life, don't as a caregiver. It taught, because I'm taking care of my mother who is 80, 85, she's bedridden. I always feel guilty. I want to go next month to see my grandson in UK. I'm wondering, how do I leave her and go? But the moment I heard your story, I said, okay, couple of weeks, somebody will take care. I'll do what I want. You actually taught me that. I'm telling you. I learned from you that you have got to lead your own life also. So I must thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Doc. Thank you so much. And to sum up what you said in your last point, I'm going to request my fellow mates who are transplanted. I think it's important to live a cautious life than a life of fear. So, and on behalf of the entire renal committee, the Kidney Warrior Foundation, I think from the bottom of my heart, it was such a privilege connecting with you. So much of knowledge, and so much of knowledge that comes from a place of love and compassion, and we are so blessed to have you as a nephrologist in our committee. Thank you very much, Doctor, for joining us, for your time. And wherever you guys are watching on Facebook, I'm going to request you guys to please put your hands together, sending loads of love, positive energy to this phenomenal human being, a great doctor who's joined us to share his knowledge today. Thank you very much, Doc.
Thank you.
And God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.